다 룩중기 리과 숨바데 다 리과 숨바 세고르베 조와 푼조레 랑드연 푼조 디시 줍주니스
Today then is the third one, which is how Sugata, the perfect attainment from oneself, results from perfect conduct.
다 chanju semba te dame gombale chagdi du gyurme kunjin du chidar gyurshenas.
From that wish, it may be possible to remove attachment by familiarizing with selflessness. How does that lead to becoming omniscient?
다 가자 ngazo di cheyonde 당보 두지 첨보체 다 두지 첨보 대래 아니 시행기 동에 세베체도 토말 딘시 퇴삼기 시에버체 다 퇴삼기 시에버체버디 아니 무슨도 토메체도 저러 콤바체 다 저러 다음에 또 비셔럽디 콤바이나 다 좀 고반 차기로 와 차지 차기로 와 군긴 간대신 차도 그래스 다디 티와데 당거지.
The question here is because what has been said so far is starting out with the perfect attitude, which is to want to benefit all beings, then the bodhisattvas start in trying to cultivate the four truths and a realization of the four truths to try and find a way to be able to benefit all beings. And then so through perfect attitude then comes perfect conduct, which then leads to which is exemplified by the fact that they then have a direct realization of the four truths in an attempt to find a solution. And then when they have attained that, so when they've attained the state of teacher, which is direct realization of the four truths of selflessness, then through repeated familiarization with that, one can remove all the afflictions and all such resultant states, but how does that lead to becoming omniscient, or how does that lead to omniscience? So that's the doubt.
Tsawa number 2 mar tab mambu yuring tuzu kombale tela gyunda yunden ta arabdu sewa nidu gyurs.
So the reply is through many aspects, using many methods, through familiarization over a long time, for that virtues and faults become extremely clear.
Dreba da mebe tuen tingi tuyin ringbur tabgi namba mangbu namba tumar kombale chanju semba tela pangyi gi gyenda yunden tada rabdu sewa nidu gyuros.
When the very object of selflessness is familiarized using many methods through many aspects over a long time, for that bodhisattva, the virtues and faults of what is to be abandoned and adopted become extremely clear.
Tadi khari sungor sidi nyundik sam pangyagi samlo mado meba ina ana da meba yuringbu gomgoya keyo mare nyuwa siba sumgi tar laba nashin sheche khandar da me gomba digi taba toplor ba ta tanda de chanju semba digi nyundik sam mayimba khazan geje sheba nashin maluba kemba sedi 다 말루바 캠바 세디 단다데 빵니기 견다 연대시기도 빵지 견다 아니 님보고 연대 타다 라다 툭세와 말루바 캠바디 구구 요바 연디 아니 디시도 장주삼바 디기 다음에 비트웬디니 아니 개와 직zam마이 개와 숨zam마이 딱 간다 뒤rum부 링라 아니 다음에 봐도 검셰 아니 윤지zam마이바 What
it's saying over here is when selflessness is cultivated, but with the intention for attaining liberation from oneself, then what is known as the afflicted obscurations, they can be removed, and that does not require very long. So it says in minimum amount of time required is 3 lives, 3 births to be able to attain liberation. And so if the goal is to attain liberation for oneself, then a long amount of time is not required. But over here, because the goal is not just to attain liberation for oneself, when selflessness is cultivated over an extended period of time, then what over here it says the virtues and faults, the qualities that are to be abandoned and the qualities that are to be adopted, they become extremely clear. And so along with a bodhisattva who has now, because a bodhisattva who has now cultivated selflessness not for one, not for three, but for many lives, in many ways, in many different aspects, what they attain as a result is not just the abandonment of the afflicted obscurations, but also the obscurations to omniscience.
Pangja sevala gomja zu di shirab gi cha dame be tekona ni de gomya re de yine ya tab gi namba mangbo da dreshe magumba yina ani chiri pangala lega che tu yo mare.
So the wisdom, the aspect of wisdom that's required to be able to remove the the cognitive obscurations, they are not, even though it's still selflessness, the aspect of wisdom is still selflessness. What's being said here is, unlike the wish to attain solely freedom from the afflicted obscurations, when this wisdom is cultivated through many different methods, and so many methods, multiple methods, then it is able, the same wisdom is able to also remove and abandon the cognitive obscurations.
Di indi zawa nanglo la tab mangbo se song shabate. Number 2 ma tab mangbo se song shabate digi ani sherab da nyamdo ani tabgi number mangbo ani komgi yores. Deya ani tugi chani tuyun ringbo. Dende komba la dene ani kyonda yunde rabdo sebe maluba kemba di yungu yores.
So in the first line where it says many methods, that's what it means. It means that apart from the wisdom realizing selflessness, there are many methods that are also used to cultivate this path and to cultivate this wisdom. And the wisdom that is being cultivated now with multiple methods to strengthen it, it is also being familiarized over a long period of time. And so it has this additional difference from just cultivating wisdom.
Yeah. Di indi da dishi thangbo danda dishi gyabdan chigla danda de number 2 ma thamangbo se di number tabgi number mangbu number 2 mar ani tuyun ringbu khombas da dirwa dishi diche.
So the first one is where this many aspects is connected to many aspects having been cultivated over a long period of time and many methods. That's the first one.
Da dishin niba dela ani niji shimbu shawandu sones korwar kewa mindebe number 2 mar langnes. Dan number 2 ma sayadi kowa la kewa mindebe number 2 ma langnes. Teda do ani tabgi kebar mangbo keba thangme sumla soba yuringbu kombale kordegi genda yenden tamjela tugrabdu sebe kunjendu kuba yenos.
Alternatively, so the other way to read it is, when powered by great compassion, by taking repeated births with different aspects in samsara. So there are many aspects now here can be read as many different births in samsara, many different kinds of births in samsara. And in those births, using many different methods over a long time, such as the 3 incalculable aeons, it will become an omniscient mind that clearly sees all the virtues and faults of samsara and nirvana.
Pa dinde yundu ani dame bi tuyendini tabgi namba mangbo da dreche ani kewa chigza mayaba kewa changme dindigi ringla da komna digi lakje dribu khari yungure sena ani zawa tena tukya sewe gyui bhaja bangwa yins.
And therefore these many methods and these many aspects, that can be many methods of birth, when they are repeatedly familiarized over a long period of time in many different ways, the resultant state is that in the next verse it says, therefore the mind is, because the mind is clear, the imprints of the cause have been abandoned.
Tena tula gyun gi sheja tada rabdu sebi chir dungi gi gyu nyemongwa mase di paksha japangba yenos.
Therefore, because the virtues and faults are extremely clear to the mind, not only the afflictions that are causes of suffering, but also their causes have been abandoned.
Sonza, da chanju senpa degi jorwa punzo tenpa dame dobe sherab komdang di tanda shubi nashi dinde chigi ani gyuringbu komyongdu degi dibu karare ani nyundi tsamma yinba, nyemong tsamma yinba, nyemongi pakcha pangdu gres, di yindi gyui pakcha pangba yins. Di pangna kari yore, di pangba yina ani sheja tada la tuk sewa se, da maluba kemba se, di yungu yores.
When this is done, and the wisdom realizing selflessness is cultivated over an extended period of time, then what the result of that is that seeing the faults and the virtues of samsara and nirvana, they become extremely clear to the mind. And they become extremely clear because not only the afflictive obscurations, but also the cognitive obscurations, they get removed, which are the imprints of those afflictive obscurations.
Yeah. Tuji shendun jujengi seru laso kedi yins.
This abandonment of the great Muni who engages in the well-being of others is what makes it superior to the rhinoceros-like and so on.
Ta nyerang da chomba ta. Ta khanda tekwan mimbi da chomba te tang. Ani tuba sangi chomden di nigi paru la keba kari yores la na. Keba di ani nyemongi pacha pangma pangi keba di yores. Ta nyundri pangba niga tumon che. Ta keba kari yores la na. Tuba sangi chomden di gi ani nyemong somdo ma se di pacha jam pangi yore. Ani nyerang da chomba di pang toku yo ma res. So
what this root verses here are saying is that the difference between the Muni, who is the Buddha, between the great Muni and the Arhats, is that the abandonment of both, even though it's the same in terms of having abandoned afflictive obscurations, the Buddhas have a unique feature. There's something unique just to the Buddhas, which is the fact that they have also abandoned the imprints of the afflicted obscurations.
So that shendun la ani juba jengi tuba chenpo tang shendun la mijuk be ani seru nigi da seru sedu tanda pesuen ramjurwa seru la sokba sedu da nyerang da jumba. 다 디기 빵발라 케바카리 요르스네 케버 첨부 요야디 디레다 녀몽기 바자 빵마 세디.
So the first line, which is the Muni who engages in the well-being of others, what distinguishes it from the rhinoceros-like and so on? So in the rhinoceros-like and so on, you have the Shravaka and Pratyeka Buddha Arhats, is that the difference lies in whether they have abandoned the imprints of the afflictions as well or not.
Da sam chom debe ani nyerang da chom batin zola chidang tubas ina tuba chumbos shuyo mare ta thanda tuba chumbos edi ani sangi chom den de la tuba chumbos ta tuba chumbos e gyumzen de nyemo ba daw sam ma yimba dada nyamdo nyemo ba phasha yang ani pangba yindu ani tuba chumbos shuyo.
So Arhats and Pratyeka Buddhas, when they become Arhat, because they've attained the state of Arhathood, or they become Arhat, they are also called Muni. But the title Muni is different when it's used for the Buddha, because the Buddha, unlike them, is called the Great Muni, or the Great Sage, I think. I don't know how that's exactly translated. But the difference between these two is that even though they may be, the title Muni is used to refer to them, when it's referring to the Buddha, it's called Great Muni because his abandonment is greater.
Once tuba sangye sunga chang yundu dia do muni mahamuni so asli dwa tuba chembo slabo kimse udir.
Yeah, so when we recite this Muni Muni Mahamunai Swaha, then the Mahamuni in that verse is because it's referring to the Buddha, the Great Muni.
Di indu da tsawa di nanglo la tupchin tupachenpo, tupchin shindun jukjingi slagidwa, di indu shindun la jukbachingi tupachenpo se dedang, seru la sobe pangpa la kepa di yores.
So that's what it says over here in the first line when it says the great Muni who engages in the well-being of others is different from that of this rhinoceros-like and so on.
Da pangpa la ke chenpo yungegi gyumsen karire,
What was the reason for their abandonment being superior?
lamgi kapso, dame kom yungdu, chigi, shendungi chedu, shengi tundu dame komgi yoba yindu, ani karire. Nyumongbe diba tsam pangyagi samlo mayimba. So, duje la che, shinji maloba tenyati, sheja maluba kimbe kone tengugu yoba yindu, di chedo. Ani tab mangbo, namba mangbo, duyin ringbu dan gombaji, gomgi yoba songsan, tele chungbarita. Tuba chumbogi pangbo kebar paa chungedi, lamgi kapsu kebar diyu wangi chungbari. Da nyeran da jombe, dindi기 shengi tundo dame do gumgi meba yindu ani maungba simjen la duje la chöten gi chedo ani quality ma sone keje dindi 창고도 세 samlo nanglo la simje di yo mare soso tarba to chibu keje mo meba yindu ani dame chibu komshana daga digi yor ma do tamangbo namamangbo de dinu gomgo di yungu yo mare di yindu ani pangbale kheba juwe di lamgi kasu lamgi lockdown kheba juwa tigi chuwa.
The difference is because why one is superior to the other is because during the causal state of when they were on the path, the Buddha when the Buddha was on the stages of the path, he was undergoing that. Even though he was cultivating the wisdom realizing selflessness, the reason he was cultivating the wisdom realizing selflessness was to be able to be of benefit to others, and therefore to benefit others he was cultivating the wisdom realizing selflessness, which means that as a goal he had the wish to have complete realization of the Four Truths so that he would be able to then benefit sentient beings in the most appropriate way. And so what that translated into was the fact that while they were cultivating the wisdom realizing selflessness, it was being done with many different methods, accompanied with many methods through many different aspects, and it was familiarized with for an extended period of time, for a very long time. The Arhats, when they were on the causal path, their concern was not other sentient beings, and so their cultivation of the wisdom realizing selflessness was directed only at their own liberation, which then led to them only and exclusively cultivating the wisdom realizing selflessness, and therefore the resultant state also was just personal liberation for themselves.
Da diguli kebar chungye di lamgi kebar di chungsuwa, soza da lamgi kebar di karire islamna, tanda da shubana shinche, dame tobi sherab tsam niga ki tumungre duwa, da tanda dila kari gugu yore, tabda jebe dame tobi sheraj gugu yoba yindu, ani tab kebra jengi sin debe dame tobi sherab, tela tyomba slawore. Tanda deshe degi tyomba di, jorwa punzo di, dame tobi sherab tsam la kuju mere. Kari la kogore, tab kebra jengi sin debe, ani dame tobi sherab tela kogore.
So, the difference at the resultant state, if you look at it like this, the difference at the resultant state arises from a difference in the causes. And at the causal state, because there's a difference between the two, when you look at the causes, what is common to both is the wisdom realizing selflessness. It's just that the wisdom realizing selflessness in the case of the path that leads to attain the state of the great Muni or the state of Buddhahood or the resultant state, that resultant state is not just cultivated by itself, but it is accompanied with the method, but the superior method. So it's a superior method which is cultivated hand in hand with great compassion, and so when you speak of the causes that lead to attaining complete omniscience, the teacher, when we use the term teacher to refer to the wisdom realizing selflessness, it's not any wisdom realizing selflessness, but it's a wisdom realizing selflessness that is accompanied with this special method, which is great compassion. So that method, the wisdom realizing selflessness accompanied with the method, is what teacher refers to.
Di indu ani tsawa jema dela tedun chena tab komba tini tomba yembar des.
Which is why in the next verse it says, familiarizing with the means to accomplish that person is asserted to be the teacher.
Deba tedar dami usumdu tobe sherab tabda jeba komba le tomba jungwe chena tini la kabdir tomba she deming gula taba yenos.
Because the teacher is the result of having familiarized with the wisdom directly realizing selflessness along with its methods, here the title teacher is naming the cause with the name of the result.
Ta di indu namgyu ngazo shudi yageta nyerangi thekwa le chanju sembe gi thekwa kebar du phakwa dosa di zo tabgi chane ma to sherab la niga tumungi dame to be sherab yimba chikche ta kebar du dosa di chanju semba la dinde gi dame ba to ba di sherab gom yungdu tab기 개발기 신이 kumgi yoba yindu tab 개발도 파고 차네 장주 sembe 태과 춘보 세제 곤도 개발도 파고 숨기 yor.
So when distinguishing between the bodhisattva yana or the bodhisattva path and the path of the others, the difference is like the different, where there is a difference is in the methods that they use. The wisdom aspect is identical in both cases because both are equally developing or cultivating the wisdom realizing selflessness. The difference is the difference lies in the method that they use along with it to cultivate this wisdom realizing selflessness, and in the case of the bodhisattvas it is accompanied with or cultivated with the superior method of great compassion.
So that 다 간조 단다 태고 최중 세시도와 치타고 채와다 태고 충아 세시 태고 최중 스케지시데 다 충아들라 까브링 간조 다 타니 표주시유도 태고 멤버 세지다 타니디 표주시기요 다디 지게 여도야 참참이야 태고 멤버스 라비용도 야 디냠내지딩이 강사절로 가랑절로 멤버 때기도 세지야 삼론나로 지 포도도 서로 두고 여바인데 아니 디탕이디 제대로 메주로 대상들의 두시 차대요 봐. 디인도다 태고 최중스 기제 시샤바는 태고 최와도 중앙스 기제 시샤바이나 다다대딩이 소리도 봐.
When we use the way we like the terminology that we use, I think we also say it in English. When we say the great vehicle or the inferior or the greater vehicle or the inferior vehicle, we use the inferior vehicle as a term to refer to the Shavak and Pratyeka Buddha path. But calling it an inferior one or an inferior path, then when you refer to practitioners of that path, is perceived or is often also used in a kind of derogatory or as if almost like they're not up to the mark. And because it can be misperceived from both sides, these days calling it the inferior vehicle is not really suggested very much. And so calling it the bigger path, I think the higher path and the lower path, or the smaller path, the smaller path and the vaster path, that might be a little more appropriate. Do we call it vaster path? Vaster vehicle? What do we call it in English? Just great, right? Yeah, but not in a comparative sense, in just a sense of one being vast and one being small. That's probably a better way to refer to it.
So that 태고 최중세 계제 시에인데 셰럽 기찬이 최중 시기요 말이야. 셰럽라 다음에도 be 셰럽 니가기 투모래. 다 최중 시에디 가르시고래 탑 최중 계제 시기요.
So if we call it great or vast, whatever you want to call it, then if you're calling it great as opposed to small, what is added in Tibetan is literally the big vehicle and the small vehicle. When you're saying big, what it has over the small one is nothing in terms of wisdom. The wisdom aspect is identical in both cases. It's the addition of the various methods that are used.
딱 가르스나 삼바갸 체중. 삼바갸 체중 그 왕기 아니 소갸 체중. 소갸 체중 그 왕기 지부갸 체중. 어딘디 인디 되기 차네 아니 태고 체중 스케제 셔로 마도 셔럽을 멤버 따기 요 말에 셔럽이 차네 니가 찍봐.
So when we say great, we're saying great because the attitude is greater than the other one. The merits that are accumulated are also greater than the other one, and subsequently the results that are attained are also greater than the other path. And that's why we use the word great to refer to one and small to the other, because the method is greater, but it's not that the wisdom is any better or superior.
Right? So the chigi 랑둥기 삼바마도 메레 지기 랑 타바 계자마도 메레 지기 타예베 시행기 타바 군데기 삼바유디 삼바 야시중 차소와.
So in one case there is just the wish to attain liberation for oneself, and in the other one the wish is to attain liberation for all sentient beings. And so then there is a vastness, or there is a greatness in terms of aspiration.
다 삼바 야시중 요베 되게 아니 조가 락렌라 야시중 용외인 바로와. 대인데 아니 지기 타예베 시행기 타예베 시행 타라발라 괴구구 요바인데 아니 디가스키 고 다디 체구구 요바인데 아니 단기 시대에게 나바투마 타망보 유린투스 콤발리 세디 용거요 샴바들 디 용거요 마 대인데 소자 체중 어디 샤워.
And obviously then resulting from this kind of attitude that is greater or different, the resultant behavior or the resultant conduct is also going to be greater. And so the effort that they will make is also going to be greater, which is described in this through the fact that the methods that they employ or they use along the path are many more. The way they go about doing it is with many more aspects, and the duration that they do it for is a lot more. And so because there's a greater attitude, it leads to greater conduct, and then that greater conduct will obviously then give rise to a superior result.
대인데 다 람갸시 중 개바 되게 단다게 제시되게 디부갑라 아니 유이 바자 빵마방이 개바들레들다.
So based on this difference at the time of the cause and at the time of the attitude is why then at the time of the result there is a difference in the kind of result that is attained, and here the difference in the result that is being described is in terms of being able to eliminate or not the imprints.
다 태고 춘비 나로네야 제마 상아 도지 태고 레윤디 시럽 계적해요 말에 시럽 단계랑 잘해 딱 가리켜봐 시냈으나 양결 탑 야체로도 말해 양결 탑디 베지체당 슉체로 치 말해.
So then when one goes further ahead from the Mahayana to the Vajrayana, then again there's no difference in terms of wisdom. The wisdom aspect is the same. Again, the difference between Mahayana and Vajrayana, or the Vajra vehicle or the great vehicle, is that the methods that are taught to cultivate the path are superior. And so those being greater is also what distinguishes Mahayana from Vajrayana later.
다치기 탑기 개발 고미용디 규인내급기 탑카리 규인내급기 남박한데 지여바 대치구 실라샤네 탑직 주연 거요. 대인데 바로도 침비 태과들 규 태과서. 상아 도제 대비 값수 지비기 넘버 D 소샤네 대드되네 탑 공단지 숨기 여바인데 지부 도제 태과서.
So if you've heard, I'm sure you have, in English we call it the causal vehicle, or the causal vehicle of the perfections. And then the Vajrayana is also called the resultant vehicle, or the resultant vehicle of Vajrayana. And the reason why these two different terms are used is because when you're talking about a Mahayana path, or the perfection of the perfections, they're known as the path of the perfections, what you're using as your methods are the various methods that are there that are present at the causal state. So you use different methods and techniques that are available to the practitioner at the causal state, which is why it's called the causal vehicle. Whereas when you come to Vajrayana, you're using certain methods and practices that are present at the resultant state, and you use those already. So because you use techniques that are present at the resultant state, it's called the resultant. Is that how it's called in English? How's it called? Yeah. The resultant vehicle, right? Yeah.
dire. So that kede number 2 nanglo la teko chumbi gi chola tos meba yungi na ani samba ja chumbo jik samlo tang samba ja chumbo yungi jik samlo tang jibu di ja chewa di samlo tang gore samba do jibu ni di ja chumbo yoba yindu di paru ge lamlo lobya te ya kazan shu di ge denshi mida su juru ta di chebe dame jibu goma di samgi chogi yo mare di yindu tabgi namba mangbo ji gom gu yoba yindu di changma la thona dew chi.
So if you are someone who has this kind of Mahayana aspiration, then please be aware that your kind of the way you're conceiving of the entire thing is that there has to be a marked difference between the attitude, the motivation, the starting out attitude that one has, and the resultant effect that one aspires for also has to be different. And because there's a greater motivation or a greater attitude that aspires for a greater result, the path that is used to cultivate it also has to be more. There has to be a lot more involved in the path that cannot just be limited to the four truths, realizing the four truths and selflessness and cultivating just that. So if that one aspires for a Mahayana path, then please keep in mind that there is a marked difference in the attitude and the result and all the practices that one does during the path to get to that result.
Dire. Ta deyende ta dendege danda keje she de dibu kebar do phagwa dendege keje she yongdu ani dendege dibu di ta trupsa di ta kawani chongso tangbo de la samba gyachewa she niba de la lam lupsu gyachewa di nibu de yongso wa yungwa yindi ani tuble tangbo chongwa she nibu de gyuru she zawa de chongbar.
And so when we have spoken of a result where we're characterizing the resultant state with all of these features that are superior to the other ones, what makes it superior to the other ones is because the path that was cultivated to attain it, or the causes that were cultivated to attain that result, were superior. And that superiority of causes arose from a superiority in the intention that the person had. And which is why over here then the next line says, because of arising first through the accomplishments, both of these are explained as the causes.
Yeah. Ta di se gorda. Samba punzo, jowa punzo, ani devara shakba, kyoba. Di shibu di che, ani tama di ngazu di tsangma ki dubja karere tseme kibu dubgo orwa. So tseme kibu dubbe shidu ngazu tanda di shidu dubgo orwa. Di shidu la ngazu lukjung lukdo geja shederwa tanda.
So what this, like, to be able to understand this, you have to remember that what we're doing is there is compassion, then there is teacher, there is sugata, and then there's protector. And these four are being used to prove that the Buddha is an infallible being. That's how we've been doing it.
Ta di ta shishtuwa, di shigi nine, di shile, ta di shibu di gyundeche, di shibu di korang pangme di gyundeche. Ina yang shigi nangne tangbu ni di gyu negapche, simjingi negapche, niba ni di sang getsabi negabi, jibu negap.
So of these four, within them there is a causal order where one precedes the other one. But of these four, the first two, which are great compassion and teacher, they are at the time of an ordinary being. And the two are the resultant two of Sugata and Protector are at the time of Buddhahood. So two are present when one is not yet a Buddha, and therefore ordinary being in that sense of not being in Buddha yet. And the remaining two are at the time of Buddhahood.
Yeah. Ordinary beings in a simjin kurwe.
What do we, a sentient being, I think we say, right? What distinguishes Buddha as a sentient being, right? Yeah.
Oh, shit. Ta di indu jeba, ta mi ngusum du be sherab tabdang jeba gomba le, rangshin gi tuen drebe deshe da gyoba ni le tangbo deshe da teni gyoba jungwe chir, samjur nibu dini, tunyi punzo gi gyur shes.
Because through familiarization with the wisdom directly realizing selflessness and its methods, amongst Sugata, that is the fulfillment of one's and others' well-being, and protector, Sugata arises first and is followed by the protector. Which is why then both perfect attitude and conduct are explained as the causes of the perfect attainment of oneself and other.
Tatala di nalo la tunyi punzo sai chile soma, rangdun punzo de shindun punzo sai tanyi chile soma, tunyi punzo slab yundu, rangdun punzo de shindun punzo che, rangdun punzo slab du deshe de la che, shindun punzo sidi gyoba de la che.
So here where you're seeing one's and others' well-being, right? One's well-being here is personified by Sugata, and the perfection of others' well-being, or the well-being of others, is the protector, is a quality of the protector.
Ta deshe de la rangdun punzo slab goy gyumzen di, ta rangyu gi timo maluba seba. Ani rangyu gi sheje gi ne maluba kimba geba. Seindu so rangi tokbe yunde da pangbe yunde geja shigi yoba yindu rangdun punzo. Ta dili ta tsetor doye meba yindu tarchimba de yindu rangdun punzo.
So when we've been using the word Sugata, or the word Sugata has been referring to the perfection of one's needs or one's well-being, the reason why Sugata refers to that, or that those are qualities of Sugata, is because Sugata refers to the abandonments and the realizations. And the abandonments and realizations are as far as one can go to fulfill one's needs. And so when one has reached has maxed out the needs for oneself, then that is manifested through the realizations that one has and what one has abandoned. And because the perfection of both of these is the state of Sugata, Sugata is known as that perfect attainment of one's needs or one's well-being.
Ta susugi kyun chashu di ta meba suyo yungdu di rangi kyun meba suyo ba yinba yindu rangi kyun di meba suyo barwa ta di yindu di rangi tuyar wa susugi kyun meba suyo di susu tuyar wa chidangi an di susu shiju gi tima yinba yindu te mebe chawa dang susu gi kimbe yundu di tse tushu di ngo kyo yundu di so rangi tokbe yundu ngani geje shirwa wa o di yindu rangduen punzo slabdor ta.
So when you speak of an abandonment is that quality which is a personal quality in one's mind stream, which is the absence of, or is characterized as the separation from defilements. And that separation from or absence of defilements is a quality that we possess in our own mind when we attain it. And so that abandonment is our personal quality. It's for one's well-being. And accompanying that abandonment, there is the corresponding, not subsequent, but the corresponding realization that has allowed for that abandonment to arise and is arising with that abandonment. So the realization is a personal realization that accompanies that abandonment. And so that's why the abandonments and the realizations are known as one's own qualities, because that's what one attains in one's own mind.
다 신된 분조스 라이온데 저 아니 시안의 최송시에 가장 가지고 계시대. 시안의 덴바시기 네 친지 말로 때네 교바제 대라송기요. 와 신된 분조스.
When you talk about the perfection of or the perfect attainment for others' well-being, that others' well-being is it manifests in the form of teaching the Dharma and all the things that we had seen before and we discussed before. So that action or that quality of benefiting others or the perfection of that is then enacted through the teaching of Dharma to other beings and then bringing them to the same levels.
That digi 가진 아주 쉬심바이 양jar 수도 셈을 냐에체도 shendun di ani parobo tela ani parobo tela langdor gi ne chinji malobo tuen di shendun so yimba di she orta.
So we already said this before and we're saying it again now to underline that this is really how one has to understand what benefiting others is. And when we say benefiting others or the well-being of others, what we're talking about is teaching them the dharma or making the dharma known to them. That's what benefiting others truly is.
다 shendun so di shen chö sungye di yimba yindu ani chö sungye gi miyu karare parobo kansa gi samba gyo tanya samba yaru tanya parobo kansa gi samba yaru tanya tone ani nilu masheba sheba suya nilu masheba sheba suya che ani pangja pongye di korang pong ru ba nye pong maro korang pong ru da kanda khol pangja pongye gi nyimbo di nilu di mishingi meba yindu di masheba sheba suya 아니 somebody gyota oti chösung에게 미 고바티로 봐 chösung에게 미유테로 봐
The aim or the purpose of teaching dharma, of teaching the dharma or of showing the dharma to someone else is to bring about a change in their mind, in their attitude, and then from this change in their attitude have them realize a state that is currently unknown to them. So have them realize reality that currently they are unaware of. The result of this will be that they themselves will go and will attain the abandonments and realizations. But then that's going to happen to them. The job of the person who's showing the dharma, or the purpose of showing the dharma to others, is to bring about a change in attitude, and then from this change in attitude, bring about a realization of reality that they're currently not aware of. The rest is going to happen. The job of showing the dharma is to ensure that the first two happen.
다든지기 최땡에 되라 든지기 최땡에 되라 소소기 삼로 귤심바 아니 소소기 니룩셰 심바 니룩셰 심바 정도 마세 아니 방자 뽕심바 든지 차딩이 안 단다시에게 교바세게 신경 분수도 차되고 왔다. 가서 이 신경운이 중에 강사도 차되고.
So then
다 신경운에 말이 신경 타르침바 중에 강사 차되고.
Therefore the benefiting others or the attainment of others' benefit, right? When one attains the benefit of others, if that is to be enacted through teaching the dharma, which is then concerned with bringing about a change in their attitude, and then leading to a realization which will then lead them to have the abandonments and the subsequent realizations. The person who's teaching this or the person who's showing it should themselves have had such a change of attitude, should themselves have had a realization of the nature that they're trying to make them understand, and should have themselves attained all of these abandonments. And so the person who has had this change of attitude, cultivated a path that has led to a realization of reality, and then cultivated that path with the attitude together to attain the complete abandonment of obstructions, such a person is known as one who has attained the final state of benefiting others. So it's the final transformation of the benefit for others.
아니 텔레 림바니버트부디 아니 살란네베 셈바두르레 간달 방도그 연데 차려와 다 방도그 연데 차가시 온도 큐르데게 아니 대단 냠도 제와 슉충보쇼 여대바 인디 림바니버드 신된 중에게다 강사 림바니버드 디레
This kind of state is the supreme state, or it's the best state for benefiting others. The next one on the list of what is the next minimum requirement, not minimum therefore, what is the next best requirement or the next best alternative, are the bodhisattvas who are on the grounds. Because even though they don't have the complete abandonments or complete realizations, they have partial abandonments and partial realizations, which are kind of infused with or are motivated solely with concern or compassion and love for others. And so then their ability is the next best ability in being able to benefit others after the Buddha. So that's the next best version.
다 숨바디 아니 태고 준비 남라 슈디 gengi 다 초람도 졸람로 내댕이 상주 셈바 빵도기 차니 단다 빵바다 람기 뎀바다 빵바 고된 차 칸도 영웅도 규르요 말인데 얘네의電식이 니루 딱딱하지 수수기 캔데버체 대단냠도 세와 니지심보도 슈타고 위어바인데 신년 중행이 되니 림바 숨바도 자주 셈바들.
The next level of being able to work for the benefit of others are those bodhisattvas who are on the first two grounds, which is on the first two paths, which is accumulation and preparation. And so even though they do not have within them any abandonment or any realization that is of the path or of cessation, they have a complete understanding of the Four Truths. Even though they may not have the realizations or the abandonments that are associated with the third and fourth truth, they have complete knowledge and understanding and realization of what they are. And along with that understanding and realization, what they do not have, what they also have, which is extremely important, is that they have this enormous, strong wish of great compassion, of wanting to benefit others. So with this perfect realization of the Four Truths, or this realization of the Four Truths accompanied with great compassion, they are the next level for being able to benefit other sentient beings.
So, ta nyaran da jomba denzo, nyaran da jomba da, nyaran loba pawa da denzo, ta labor du nyaran da jomba geje sheo shimba ina, ta bet pangba chane nyangdingu du chedege, tokba ge chane bet dame todoba indege, dindege kansa, ta 방도의 연den찬이 깨져 셔버이나 상선 초남을 하가 열어다 슈중부 슈부 열어대 얘네 자원 인지신부의 당기 매번 인디 아니 코란솔랑 아주 신든 중인 강사들라다 다 리기 매에서 나오지 열다.
When you think of unlike the bodhisattvas, if you think of the beings on the Shravakas or the Pratyeka Buddhas, not just on the path but especially in relation to when they've attained the state of when they're all arhats, when they've attained the path of normal learning, the abandonment that they've attained at that point is nirvana. So they've removed all afflicted obscurations. And the realizations that they have are correspond to the abandonments that they've attained. So if you consider them, their realization and their abandonment compared to a bodhisattva on the path of accumulation is far superior. What they don't have, however, is that they don't have compassion, or they don't have this love for sentient beings, they don't have this great compassion. And so their abandonment of having abandoned self-grasping, and their realization of being uninterruptedly in a realization of selflessness is of no use to us. And therefore it's as if they cannot really do anything for us. They're of no benefit or use to anybody.
Tadi inde ani shendön tu segda, shengi töndu 가장 아주 shendön도 담에도 비셔라고 shengi töndu 최송 스케제 셰데기 shendön도 like 고축사디 인지신부 귤랑하고네 고축이었다.
Which is why up until now in the text and when we've been speaking of for the benefit of others, for the purpose of others, the starting point of the benefit of others or doing things for others, the beginning or the starting point of this is when one has cultivated great compassion.
그래. 대인도 다 녀란 라준비 대 니지신봉도 제매바 인데 어다 디레 다 신된투 세계제디 용구요 말다.
And because Shravaka and Pratyeka Buddha arhats have not cultivated great compassion, for them there is no talk of doing it for others.
답변아 미션바지게 내가 된다. 아니 걔랑 뒤주지 땅으로 세스람나. 아니 가 뒤주 땅에 가 뒤주 땅에 니 된다는 가 뒤주 땅 두서 말이스. 체도니네 디기 체도 가 뒤주 땅에 니 내가 정말 샤지 디 체도 내가 된다 제도 삼아래 세긴가서 강사 릭직도와 다든데 강사디 릭직디기 아니 지기 다 신기 된도 아니 랑기 내가 가르레된 가르인 차장略당시 다간데 콜 펜바지 중에 디기도 삼고 꾸론된 디기 돈에 略당시 신된신이 강사 릭니도와 다 강사 릭 당부 디기 아니 심미션발 펜토바 요마르스는 펜토고 요르데 토단데 가르스는 샤도 쇼라 펜토나 마도 체dun이니 디체도 답변나 계란 디니 톰라 두고 요베스 nga kawa dugo is nga thomla dugo ta keran thomla dugo yena ani shorla ngi chala di kyong ra chase de digire sing di dinde so ro shorla kero chi ma do chedunyi ni di chedo dugo yo marta ta mijigla chedunyi ne kogi chedo sosul lega tunda dugo yo mar chedunyi ne kogi chedo dugo wa o sonza da nyaran da jome koban undu che yongde shorla di negabla dajumbadi de tos dewa doji nguni dewa yodebaji shorla dos pendo chungni ji pemba ina pemba re mato chedo nyene se jorwa digi chedo nyene se gejedi ta mebe soro jorda inji chumbudi mebe indi so
so if you think of this in terms of an example, for instance, this is example is there are some people who, if you ask them to do something for you or like take time out of their lives and their day to do something for you, one person, one personality or one character is, no, I'm not going, they won't do it, they won't be able to do it. The other one, the other kind of personality or character is that if you ask for some help, they make active effort, they will make an active effort to stop what they're doing, put that aside and devote time exclusively to someone else's needs. And so of these two people, is the first one not of benefit to others? It's not that they're not of benefit, they are of benefit, but the kind of benefit they do is a benefit that can happen kind of as a byproduct or along the way while they are working for their own needs. For instance, if you have something that you need and you request a friend to pick it up and you tell them, look, it's on your way, can you get it pick it up on your way back because it happens to be on your way, the thought that says, it's on my way, it's not really that much of a disturbance, I'll do it, they will still be able to do that. So the Arhats and Pratyeka Buddhas, the Shravaka and Pratyeka Buddhas along the path and when they attain the result, it's if you have some sort of connection with them or you have some sort of link with them, then along the way while they are practicing and while they are doing things, if they can be of benefit, they will do it. But they will not actively take time to single-pointedly and exclusively derail themselves from the path that they are on for the benefit of others. Whereas the other attitude of the Bodhisattvas is irrespective of whether it happens to coincide with what they're doing or not, they will actively take time out to be able to go and do things for others and work for the benefit of others. So this exclusively for the benefit of others, this exclusiveness can be kind of illustrated through this example. So for others, whenever you've been seeing for others, that's what it means. That's the kind of attitude of what for others is. And to be able to have this attitude where one is doing it for others, this kind of attitude is required. And to cultivate this attitude or to even have this attitude is why great compassion is necessary. However, just great compassion in itself is also not sufficient or complete in being able to benefit others. So the other quality or the other requirement to be able to benefit others beyond having great compassion is to know the Four Truths, and so for oneself to have realized the Four Truths. So if all of you have great compassion, which is the wish to benefit others, and you have realized the Four Truths, and you know the Four Truths, then the two qualities required to work for the benefit of others is complete. And then you can start working for the benefit of others.
손자들 장주 셈바 왔다 디 소람니 제자니 신뢰 체험 고추고요다.
Which is why from the bodhisattvas from the path of accumulation itself, they start engaging in working for the benefit of others.
손자 디인도다 신뢰 체험이 마사 신뢰 체험이 멍시 기준이 창바인도 디는 고추로와 어디인도 저런 부치게 되니 라린 shum나로라 기회신이 친이 윤된 주된 시에 나로니 야 개천부직이 가려나 가정아도 개천부직이 가리셔서 대권이 떠고되고 딘시 떠고되고 그래라서 딘낭로니 개체부직이 가리송래 세와데 송래 송자도 세와데다 아니 딘시기 대권이 떠고 딘시기 일로 떠고니 됐다 신된 기회신이 지라야 개주 창고에 개체신이 되시다.
And that's why the foundation, therefore, for being able to benefit others is to have these two. Without having these two as a foundation, one can't really benefit others. And this, because of this, Lama Tsongkhapa in his Lamrim Chemo, when he speaks of the qualities that a spiritual guide or a spiritual friend needs to have, he lists out 10. Amongst these 10, one that we touched upon the other day was that they have to know what reality is, or they have to have a realization of it. Along with knowing what reality is, the other quality that they have to have is that they have to have great compassion. So Lama Tsongkhapa also lists these out in listing out the 10 qualities of a spiritual friend. And again, this is just emphasizing the fact that if you are to benefit anybody else, the two qualities that are essential or indispensable, one is that you have great compassion, and two, that you have an understanding of what the Four Truths are or what reality is.
Tadi logic samtang in Tarantua, Rangi, Dembashi machine, Shenla Talam Karetengore, dance camera. Shenla Talam Tungedilla, Shen Tabala Tingeda, Tarbe Lam Tungedilla, Tarbala Tingedilla, Givishin Segore, Tarbala Tia, the Lagojuni Tia, Mare, Lam Tun Tegudi, when the Talam Susu Shengu, so the Dishi machine, Talam Tun came in the wa, the Induko, Jumzendakdua.
And if you just think of it in terms of what we ordinarily consider to be logical, if the job of a teacher is to show you the path, and they don't know the path, what path can they show you? So when you say this is a teacher, their job is to lead you to liberation. If they don't know what liberation is, then how are they supposed to show it to you? Liberation, the way they lead to liberation is not like they hold your hand and take you there. They show it to you. They have to explain it, clarify it. And for them to be able to do that without themselves having had that understanding and realization, they are ill-equipped. So even if you just consider it in a very ordinary way, it's obvious that it's a necessary thing that one has to have.
That's our mena. Ani talam shinge yonaya ten tugumari. Genke tugumari. Pajudigi genke tugumari. Zewa mena pajudigi genke tugumari. Zewa mena ani shinge tundo genke ga cheba yonaya paru dewa kale khasuna senala kyogale ungure. 아니 뢰당시그래 띵에 된다 말 가르치 갈래 야오르세 example 유시그래 어다 간다지 디칸다디 셴라 탈람 친지 말로도 땡셰다 파조라 파조기 튼도 갈래게 해셔로 디 창마 용토고 말해 디인디 손장 단다데 지rum부지기 지진 cham바 공부 도대긴기 롱디 창제 디니 랍도 또봐 세 디다 Dini rabdo tokwa make den tsewe dani kyowa pangla ten sergida Dini rabdo tokwa seyade dan tsewe dani seyanyi budi marsal gugres kechenbojin gugres odison nadwa.
If one does not have love or hasn't cultivated love or compassion, then first one is not really going to be concerned with doing anything for anyone else. And assuming you do make an effort, when that starts becoming difficult, or when one starts not feeling like it's worthwhile, or when one faces obstacles, then naturally that kind of maintaining that wish or that motivation to benefit others is very easily compromised. And so in the absence of love and compassion, the acting or doing things for the purpose of others and sustaining that until it reaches the result that one has set out for, that can't be upheld. Firstly, it's difficult to start it out, and if one starts, it's very difficult to sustain and maintain it. And without having these, then that final result is also very difficult to attain. Which is why, again, Lama Tsongkhapa, in describing the qualities of the teacher, he says, a realization of reality accompanied with this great love or great compassion are the main kind of like, the root, if you will, or like the real foundation upon which benefiting others has to be, the bedrock upon which it has to be founded.
So that dindigi tsewa di yuna duja kangla chu tensai kangla chu sungsai di kangsa dela tsewa di yobi ina ani rangi keben tagi marita ngal nikola shej nikola di chu di shej ngala keben kararagi du segi takanda tsedida ta tsedida dewa yugi keben jiyorwa dela tsewa nin tagi mari tsedida dewa yugi keben 부점에 매버 이나야 간다 제와 요버시 아니 탈람 친지 말로 시대바 아니 파주 강사리 회도롱 통소나 최 멤베루도 송투비였다 다 탈람 시벨로디 연나야 제베 통소나 아니 세디던 제베 고바 세디던 제와 요데긴 랑라 펜도지 야자도 무슨 지금 마통바 이나 아니 최 마통이야 야자 신보도는 망아 최 퇴야 야자 유유도는 최 유가 퇴야 아니 야자 제 마통은 아니 가져 리퀘스트 해봐 이나야 나 투주 컴리멘도 나 직직 셔 이니 셔서는 또 이제 리젝트 안 셔. 듣고 이 춘이로 와. 고 춘이를 듣다.
If someone doesn't have love or compassion, then naturally one's attitude will be of seeing what benefit there is for oneself. And so in the absence of love or compassion, one is not able to see beyond how it is of use to oneself, especially with respect to how it is used for one's life, this life especially, limited to this life. And so with seeing how, or with contemplating or trying to evaluate how this is beneficial to me or what use this is of me, then becomes a criteria that starts to become like a filter or a lens before doing anything. If someone has a realization of reality, knows what it is, and is motivated by this great compassion and great love, then when a person who is willing to listen or would like to know about the path, know about the teachings is present, these causes are sufficient and there will be no further effort required for the person to explain or show the path to someone else. If one knows the path, but one does not have, it's not motivated by or it's not sustained by love and compassion, then even if the person requests it many times, it's likely that one will say, I don't have time, I have this to do, I have something more important, more significant, or more relevant. Or if the person who's requesting it can be of benefit based on how useful they can be for me, then I will teach more, I will teach less, I will have more kind of drive or determination or effort put into the requests based on how I feel that they're useful for me. So as long as this attitude of great compassion or great love doesn't kick in, everything is going to be a little compromised in one's ability to be able to be of benefit to others.
gewishinyi chendeyo yobada da gewishinyi sidu tarlamgi migdun chingedinde chendeyo yobada ngone koranya chendeyo yoba miyu korada nga miyu shenla pendo cheri sege samlodinde yongeyina shugyasa di dini dire sewala shugyagore ani nilu togode shugyagore.
So what this is showing is actually very important and worth bearing in mind, because what's being said is, if you happen to be someone who has this kind of attitude, or you aspire to have this attitude, and so one is aspiring to be a Mahayana practitioner or cultivate a Mahayana attitude, what is absolutely indispensable, the two things that one has to make sure one can cultivate and perfect are an understanding of reality accompanied with great compassion. These become absolutely essential. So this is the message that's very relevant over here that's being given.
Oh yeah. Tan number to matamangbo segiya deba desuchi glass.
Then carrying on, another way of commenting on through many aspects using many methods.
Number two matamangbo shesugi desu shene tedar twesamgi tenla pabi midasu jurugi number lendang tumar 닝지 첨보라 소바 탑망보드 데네 유릉부 두소 공발레 창심 소제 테라 균 두근니다 연된 고람 니보 랍도 세브르 캠베 이신군도 규로.
So another way of reading it is the following: by familiarizing over a long time with the realization of the 16 aspects of impermanence and so on, arisen through repeated hearing and reflection, supported by the use of many methods such as great compassion, in a bodhisattva who is still an ordinary being, the exalted wisdom that clearly sees the faults of the truth of suffering and causes, and virtues of the truth of cessation and path will come to manifest.
Yeah. Tatanda de tela gyönda yönden ta rabdu sewa nidu gyuru segi gyöndi dugun niti she yönden de kolam nila sha de indu demba shi che. Ta demba shi gi demba shi gangla ta demba shi gangla ba chatsa malu ba kemba chik. Ta condition yungure slab yundu ani tösam gi tenla pabe midasu chudu gi numbers. Rosa so that number 2 ma segi number di midasu chudu gi number la sha di lendang tumar komgire niji shimbo de simbe ton lendang tuma di gewa ring mangu ring la kom di kom yongdu ani dugunyi da gyön dugunyi da yönden konan yubo de la ani tuk rabdu sewa maluba kemba di yongure es da dinshi nilu ngusum de kemba zamma yimba dinshi da chasang wala da dugunyi chasang kazanga zu maluba kemba de shimba gu gyayimba o di chasang yongure es.
So this way of reading the verse is where virtues and faults, virtues refer to the latter two truths and faults refer to the first two truths. Many aspects refers here to the aspects that are the 16 aspects, such as impermanence. Many methods refer to methods such as great compassion, and familiarizing over a long period of time means taking these many aspects, these 16 aspects, using methods such as great compassion and repeatedly familiarizing with them over a long period of time, what ends up happening is that the virtues and faults become extremely clear, meaning not just is one absolutely clear with respect to the nature of the four truths, but is completely clear with respect to the nature of the four truths. If you remember when we said complete knowledge, complete realization, it was not just a realization of what the four truths are, but with all of those various details that we discussed previously. And so what happens when this is done over an extended period of time is that all the complete qualities of the four truths become extremely clear.
Oh yeah. Tena dinshi nilu tadala tuk sevichi nyemongbo pangwa masi ti pachajan pangwa yinos.
Therefore, because their minds are clear with respect to the entirety of the nature of the four truths, they will have abandoned not only the afflictions but also their imprints.
Ta kondu ngazo dinshi midasu chudu du stenla pap ani digi ani nijishimbu simbe tone ta di komyongdu ani di karsogore. Ta pangba de she condition ngo de chugu yores ke je she yundi ko zawa do kongi ma she zawa ti de dewe tone do stishi gyaba ina lol de sevaro do samgorta.
So I think when you're thinking about how by great compassion following with the other aspects, when you consider how all of these lead to the state of sugata here, which is the complete abandonment of all, it's a little clearer if you think about it in this process. In these verses that have been discussed, it's clearer to try and understand what that is, how that works.
다 당다 데 룩중기 갑라 룩중기 갑라 마 대시시에 저 빵바 대시시고 얼와 수자다 빵바 대시시기 여버인데 아니 빵적이 교연텔라 니모 비티바직다 아니 대마임비 미시비 봉와세 저 지금 아주 계지시고 얼와다 간다 시디스 밍다신 대원면로 어디 비지시기 여버인데 다 지워디르와 가장 단계 지워 레베디 소자 삼바 분조를 때는 조화 분조 공부이나 아니 니몽 방바디 계속 고토구도데 아니 시디 방바디 카리스 고토구레스 라유 시디 방바디 고단딘데레스 야시다 도스 대시미다 주루 방바디 시디 방만 고단딘데레스 라분데나 대차분메로.
So when you're talking about sugata over here in the forward process, sugata refers to the abandonment, right? It's the abandonments. And amongst the abandonments over here in sugata, it's not just afflicted obscurations, it's also the non-afflicted obscurations. And just for the sake of making it easy, maybe we can call them cognitive obscurations, even though technically here they're not called cognitive, but just for us to understand what is being abandoned are not just the afflictive obscurations, but they're also the cognitive ones. And then when you say, well, the cognitive obscurations are also abandoned, so one attains abandonment of this, the doubt was, well, if you cultivate great compassion and you cultivate the wisdom realizing selflessness, I can see how that leads to abandoning the afflicted obscurations. But how does that lead to omniscience? Or how does that lead to abandoning the cognitive obscurations, which was the question. In response to this doubt, if you consider it in this way, it might be slightly easier to understand.
다디 디송아 단다 디기 방바디시 키주디 마셰베체 단다 가리셰레 조로 분조레 아니 방바디시디 칸디스 용구레세 게지디시버다.
So is that clear? What's being said is not just what the qualities of the abandonment that is sugata is being spoken of, but how perfect conduct leads to attaining the abandonment that is sugata.
Oh yeah. 다 단다디 다 텔레트비 대시디 아니 계주 간디지 요레스 텔레트비 대시디 지다부 샤나스.
What kind of sugata is realized from that?
다 텔라 아니 아주 계시 숨시기 요레 규방 윤된 숨 대시 니인스.
And so abandonment of causes and the three qualities is itself sugata.
루중기 갑기 대시니 둥에다 넹엘랭기 규방바 티니인스. Teni lekbar pangbata, lar midobar pangbata, malubar pangbata, yundin sumda demba yinos.
The sugata that is being spoken of during the forward process is the abandonment of suffering and its negative tendencies itself. The three qualities are excellent abandonment, abandoned to never return, and completely abandoned.
So zata, tanda de deshegi, 방자대라 둥에 방바 잠마임바 둥에데 냠도 넹엘랭기 규방바 치고비요레.
So along with the abandonment of suffering, or with suffering being abandoned, also the negative tendencies associated with suffering have to be abandoned.
Yeah. 다 계주 숨겨나네 당보 렉버 방바 디 가리레세나 둥에 때민칠 레긴 테네 다메바 통함 jorwa le yinos.
To the first one, excellent abandonment. Not being a support for suffering, it is excellent. It arises from seeing or from engaging in no self.
Deba, tumba shaja tuba gyugi pangba de shujens. Dunge lekbar pangba yinde, dunge gi temi be pangba yimbe eshers. Ta tubde, dame ngusum do tongwe tonglam ta, tongsin kombar chebe jorwa de, gombe lamle tobe pangba yimbe eshers.
Take the subject abandonment in the continuum of the teacher Shakyamuni. It is an excellent abandonment of suffering because it is an abandonment that is not a support of suffering. The reason is established because it is an abandonment that is attained through the path of seeing that directly sees no self. Please just change that. That directly sees no self, and from the path of meditation that engages in familiarizing with what was already seen.
Tadi kowa dus lemba ina yagu yore. Khazang azu chik sheemba. 소와 둥에기 이중네 착바 더 체와 다딜 착데스 직게제 시행바 대당 다음에 웃음도 통네 아니 다음에 웃음도 통네 아니 착바도 제대베 착바도 제대바 디니를 개바 가려요랬을라나 찍디 찍디 가르래 찍디 레버 방법이 말해 마이비 김전 가래 티 둥이 땡치기 그래 소 소와 둥이 예중에 차대디 둥이 땡래 김전 가래라나 가장 가리시에서 셰당도 중대네 스케제시에서 다 다음에 웃음도 통네 아니 방샤베 차대디 디 가르래 레버 방법에 딘디 방법디기 뒤남기야 둥이 땡치기 말해 디인디 가장 가리시에래 체와 매당스 스케제시에서 딘디기 방법들라 체와 간에 요 말이스 체와메다 양다되 랑신라니 친로기 세 가장 계제시에 가둘라 디 방법들라 체와 요 말이스 둥이 땡치기 와 말이 다 초와 둥이 이중의 차례디 둥이 땡치기 요래 손자 다 단다데 덤버 샤저 두베기 방법이 가르려서나 둥이 땡치기 말이스 방법이 둥이 땡치기 요 말이스 다 둥이 땡 미지비 금전 가르려서나 다음에 통네 방법들이 와서 어디 숨겨
So maybe if you think of it like this, it might be helpful if we consider it. We had said previously that you can try and attain a state free of attachment that is attained from having kind of renounced or having separated yourself from the manifest form of suffering. So you have it's maybe more terminological, but you have an abandonment that is the absence of manifest suffering. And then you have an abandonment that is the absence of suffering that has arisen from directly realizing the wisdom, directly realizing selflessness. So one abandonment is an abandonment of suffering that arises through realizing this selflessness directly, and the other one is an abandonment that has arisen from reflecting on the faults of suffering, manifest suffering, right? So let's say you have these two forms of abandonment. The previous one here would not be an excellent. I'm not sure excellent is the right way, I'll change it maybe. But anyways, it doesn't have the first quality of being an excellent abandonment because it is, if you remember earlier, the reason was because it is concomitant with aversion, or it gives rise to aversion, right? Now, when you're talking about the abandonment that arises from directly seeing no self, that abandonment is an excellent abandonment because if you remember earlier, it was quite characterized as being without harm. It has no harm, there's no harm in it. And so the abandonment that is the absence of attachment that arises from reflecting on the faults of manifest suffering is not it has not been well abandoned, maybe that's more accurate. It's not well abandoned because itself it has aversion in it. The other one which arises from the wisdom realizing selflessness is the abandonment of attachment, but here attachment has been well abandoned or properly abandoned because it has no more harm in it. It's a state absence of any such harm. And so that's why the abandonment here that the Buddha has is the first qualification is excellent abandonment or well abandoned or properly abandoned.
Tsawa nanglola tongam jorwa le yinu sedi tongwa sedi dame ngusumdo tongme tonglamche jorwa di tongsin komparchebe jorwa sedi gomlamche soza ta dame ngusumdo tongme tonglanda dame ngusumdo gombe gomlamgi pangba yindu kari chabare gombe lamle tobe pangba yimba songzang dendegi pangba di lekbar pangba res odishi.
So then the lines, the last part in the verse which says it arises from seeing or from engaging in no self. Seeing refers to the path of seeing, and engaging in no self refers to engaging in repeatedly engaging again with having seen with no self that was seen directly. And because the state of abandonment here arises from either the path of seeing or the path of meditation, it is an excellent abandonment. The second one, which is abandoned to never return,
Tsawa Keda Gyuni Gunjung Ta Layang Doje Shebayin, Dade Sabian Pangbeche, Larmi Shekwa Nino, Teden Tade Dani Gis.
Birth and faults that continually arise, it is explained, will return again. Having abandoned the seeds of the view of a self, he will not return again. It is true of a different nature.
Ta Deba, Pangba Te Sedu Tangi Chujen Tagaranche, Dumba Shayu to be Pangba Te Chujens, Koale Lar Midok be Pangba Yinde, Danzin the Zindan Tadebe, Dembong Musum to Tonwe, Lam Gombe Topgi, Dagde Sabian Pangbe Pangba Yimbe.
This abandonment is an abandonment that will never return to samsara because it is an abandonment where the seed of self-grasping has been abandoned through the power of cultivating a path that directly sees a truth whose mode of being apprehended is different from that of self-grasping.
Ta thanda tsawan nanglo la sigang thangma de la theden thade danyi ki slaidi danjin da jindan thade be dembong ngusum do thongwe lam. Ta di gombe topgi khari pangba sedu tsawa sigang sumba de la dade sabin pangbi cherirs. Oda tende gi lam gombe topgi dade gi sabin pangsona tende di kharere ani lar midobe pangbas.
So here it's saying it is truth of a different nature, which means what it perceives is a reality or is a truth that is of a different nature. And what is it that it is seeing that is this truth of a different nature? What it leads to is that it leads to abandoning the seeds of a view of a self. Because it realizes a truth that is of a different nature from self-grasping, and when it is cultivated, it abandons the seeds of the view of a self. He, the person who possesses such an abandonment, will not return again. Therefore, it is abandoned to never return.
Ta digi khare shego re thonglam da gonlam yikap gi rwa thonglam da gonlam yikap gi pangba di ani lebor pangba reves lana re dungi gi temi me pangba re jumjin tak da sangi yore dame ngusum thong lam da gombe lam gi tobe yeshi said digi dwa ta di lebor pangba re de lar mido be pangba reves na mare lar mido be pangba mainde dinang lo khare sangi yo mare sedu tanda ta kwesha yudigi danjin de jindan thadebe dembong ngosum do thome lam gomgi yore lam gombe tobi tobe pangba re ina ya dinde pangba de dagde sabyen bambe pangba chayo mar tanda danjin pangdo yo marwa di dagde sabyen bambe pangba mimba yindu lar midebe pangba sedi shetugu yo mare.
What this is saying is, if you consider the abandonment that one attains at the path of seeing and meditation, and you try to see whether it is an excellent abandonment, it is, because it has the qualities of being an excellent abandonment, because it is no longer the support of suffering. However, if you ask whether it is an abandonment that is to never return again, that it is not, because even though the part of the reason where it has been abandoned through the power of cultivating a path that directly sees the truth, whose mode of being apprehended is different from that of self-grasping, what it does not have is that it has not abandoned the seeds of self-grasping yet. So the abandonments that are attained at the time of the path of seeing and meditation are excellent abandonments, but they are not abandoned in a way that they will never return again, because they still have the seed of self-grasping.
Ta dindegi tombang pangbe tombang da gombang gi thanguni wa pangbe dindegi gi pangba de lar mido be pangba mayimba songsa digi dojo kharere pangba de la kharsigire lar dogbe pangba askeje shigire layan doji sheba inste zawanalo layan doji sheba inste pangba lar dogba askeje shire ta pangba lar dogba se di kowa di pangba di nyamdo be keje shigi yo mare kari shegor sena pangba lar dogbe pangba kharjin labarela na pangba di gyudin gi khangsa di lar yang kowa la kewa lingi yo ba songza layan doji sheba inste odi lago ma do pangba khoro dojo be keje shigi yo mare.
So when we say abandoned to never return, because the abandonment of the path of seeing and meditation is not that, what we call it is an abandonment that will return. Not that will return, yeah, an abandonment to which it will return, or an abandonment with returning maybe. What it means is, it doesn't mean that the abandonment will at some point revert and stop being there anymore. What it means is, in the person who has such an abandonment, or a person who has such an abandonment, will return to samsara. So what it means is, the person who has this abandonment, an abandonment to never return, or an abandonment with return, doesn't refer to the abandonment going away or not. It refers to the person who has that abandonment and whether they return to samsara or not. That's why people on the path of seeing and meditation are known to have, their abandonments are called abandonments with return, because that person will return once again in samsara.
송자 캬바 여데 따들 캬바 여데 닥데 사베 마방나 강사딜라야 코와 독비치르 빼나 균슈 시바 렌dum바와 깨와다 균 샥소 시바 둥기 바르 중화 임베 디 빵바 텔라 라르 독제 룽레 셰바 따부인노 시디 룽디 상기 도날 수바레스.
There is perversion to the reason given, because if the seed of the view of a self has not been abandoned, that person will once again return to samsara. For example, a stream enterer of 7 existences, for a stream enterer of 7 existences, birth and faults such as attachment will continually arise until the 7th existence. For this reason, their abandonment is explained to be one that will return again in the texts.